Right. So the next phylum, I'm sorry about cutting the top off the other phyla in the last filming, but this is the next group is phylum Mollusca. These are the mollusks, and we think of these animals as having shells. They're coelomates. They have complete digestive tract. They do have this structure called a mantle. The mantle is a skirt-like organ that secretes the calcium carbonate for the shell. And we'll talk about that here in a second. They have feet, or a foot. A foot is a muscular organ that allows them to dig into the sediment. For instance, clams and oysters will dig into the sediment a little bit so that they can, well, oysters more attached like mussels, but clams will dig into the soil so that they can only expose their areas that take in water, because they are filter feeders. Some of them are, right? They have shells. Some of these are external. Most of these are external. Some of them are internal. And they have this structure called a radula. It's a rasping tongue. If you've ever seen a snail in an aquarium, it's sliding around on the glass, you can see this thing pulsating in the mouth, and this is that rasping tongue called the radula. It's like an SOS pad that scrapes the stuff off the surface and allows it, then it's kind of sort of sucks in that material for food. They do not have segmentation, which separates them from the next group. So if you have, gastropods. Gastro means belly. Poda or pod is foot, so they are the belly feet. These are snails and slugs. If you have one shell, you're called a snail, and if you have no shell, you're called a slug. And they slide around on their foot, right here, right? And most are herbivores. Some of them are carnivores. They eat other snails, etc. But bivalves. Bi means two. Valves is talking about shells. So they have two shells that fit together. And we're talking about clams, mussels, and oysters here. They do not have a radula, and their foot digs into the sediment, or sand, or rock, pebbles, and things like that, and allows it to dig into there to kind of hide itself. And they filter feed. If you have a mantle, it's kind of attached to the shell right here, and it lays on top of all that other stuff. All right, that mantle gets a grain of sand in it. It irritates the mantle. If you go to the beach and you get sand in your bathing suit, it's not very comfortable, is it? So it's the same deal. The mussel does not like the sand in there, so it starts secreting calcium carbonate around it. And it continues and continues and continues until finally it has this smooth thing called a pearl, right? So our cultured pearls, are they man-made or natural? And the answer to that question is actually, it's a trick question. They're actually both. What happens is that the native mussels in the United States, and a lot of them come from Kentucky, are harvested, and their shells are then made into very small, perfectly spherical beads. And then these beads are placed into the oysters, and the oysters then make perfectly round pearls. And so that's why they're a little more expensive. More expensive, not little. And so they're actually man and naturally made. But the freshwater mussels in the United States are one of the most endangered group of animals on the face of the earth. Most native or freshwater mussels are found in the southeastern United States. In fact, there are more species of native freshwater mussels in Kentucky than any place on the earth except for Alabama and Tennessee. It ranks third in the world for a number of species of freshwater mussels. However, like I said, they're one of the most endangered group of animals on the face of the earth. Their habitat is being destroyed either by impoundment or by they have a unique way of reproduction. The females have a piece of their foot. They extend out of the shells and make it look like a worm or a fish. And when the fish comes close to investigate, it shoots the little larvae into the face of the fish. When that happens, the larvae attach to the gills of that fish and live as parasites for a few weeks and months, and then they drop off. And when they drop off, that's how they move from one area to another. They drop off and they start their life there at a new place. The problem is that most of these species are very particular. They only are like one type of fish. One type of fish is used as their host. So it takes, if that host fish becomes less and less common in a stream, then reproduction of that particular mussel becomes less and less. So there's a lot of factors, sedimentation, a lot of factors that are going against the native freshwater mussels in Kentucky. Cephalopods are octopi, squids, nautilus, cuttlefish, and their foot is divided into tentacles with suction cups that allow it to grasp things, because these are predators. Their radula is transformed into a beak. We used to dissect a loligo, which is a little squid in zoology class at Berea College. Their beak was the size almost of a parrot beak. So if you take that and extrapolate that to a Humboldt squid, which is like 6 feet long, and then you extrapolate that into a colossal or giant squid, which are over 100 feet long, you're talking about a beak that can actually sever an arm off of a person. So extremely good at eating and feeding because of their tentacles and suction cups and this beak. They have an internal pin or shell. They have large eyes with a retina like we do. They can see really well because a lot of them live at great depths. The giant squid and colossal squid we never collected an actual live specimen for a long period of time. It was fairly recently when actual live specimen was collected by fishermen. Most of the time they would be washed up ashore. They are the favorite food of sperm whale. During the whaling days, sperm whales being hunted, they would have suction cut marks, scars on their bodies where they've been trying to eat the squid and the squid had been fighting back. They are probably the most intelligent group of invertebrates. My wife and kids were watching a documentary on Animal Planet, and they saw this aquarium had several aquariums in the back lab room that weren't on display, and one of them had a octopus in it. Well, they were noticing that some of the aquaria around the room were missing some fish. And that the floor was wet. So they had their suspicions, so they put a camera in the lab and left for the night. And sure enough, the octopus was climbing out of its aquarium, scurrying across the floor, climbing into the aquarium where the fish were. They would grab a fish, eat it, and then they would get out of that aquarium, go back to its own aquarium and get in, all before the next morning, and the scientists would come back. So very smart. If you put a fish in a bottle with a cork on it, it will figure out how to get that cork out and get to the fish. So they're very intellectual as far as invertebrates go. So those are the mollusks, all right? Mollusca. Phylum Annelida are the segmented worms, and they are coelomates, complete digestive system. They're hermaphroditic. Some of the mollusca were hermaphroditic, and some of them were dioecious, but all of the annelids, or segmented worms, are hermaphroditic. But what separates them from the mollusks is that they have true segmentation. Mollusks do not have segmentation. And they have these little structures called setae. Setae are these little chitinous spines that allow it to move. If you ever handled the earthworm when you're fishing or something, you know that there's one side that's sort of flat. And if you rub your finger along that flat side, you can feel sort of like a little rough, like a 5 o'clock shadow on it, and that are these little setae. So oligochaetes, oligo means a few, chaetes means setae, so they have a few setae per segment. These are the earthworms and redworms, what you think of, and they have a few setae per segment, and they're decomposers. Polychaetes, or many setae, are clamworms and bloodworms, and these guys, the ones that are macroscopic, are marine in their inhabitants. They come from marine environments, and they're carnivores. They eat little mollusks, they eat other worms, and they eat a lot of different things. The last group of Annelida are the leeches. They don't have setae, but they do have segmentation, and they are parasites. They attach themselves to a host, and then they will draw out the blood from the host. They have in their saliva this anticoagulant, which means that it allows the blood not to clot, to flow freely. And once the leech has gotten its meal, it drops off, so it just doesn't stay on the body. And it was used back in the day as a type of medicinal treatment. In the days of the Revolution, and shortly after, if people were sick, they decided that it was probably something to do with their blood. They knew the blood was the life form of the life flow of the body, and so if somebody was sick, it was definitely something to do with the blood. And so in order to get rid of that infection, for instance, they would bleed people. All right. If you see a barbershop, they have a red and white pole, right? The red part shows that they would bleed. They would do bloodlettings. And they were the doctors of the time. So because they had razors, and they would either cut their patient, or they would attach leeches to suck out the tainted blood. of course, that was counted as witch doctory later on, and leeches were left alone. But we have recently found that in places of reattachment surgery, if you go to Jewish Hospital in Louisville, it's one of the best reattachment centers in the United States, with a finger that needs to be reattached. They will attach it, and they will go through a regimen of bleedings with leeches, because they found out that the blood vessels, the nervous tissue, all of that, the muscular tissue, all will get more healthy faster and recover faster if there's no pooled blood in the area of reattachment. So what the leech does is suck out the pooled blood, and it allows for a quicker recovery. So we've gone full circle with leeches. All right, the next invertebrate phylum is phylum Arthropoda. These are the jointed-legged animals. Poda is foot, leg, or foot. Arthro means jointed. And so these are coelomates with complete organ systems, but their appendages, their legs, their mouth parts, their reproductive male parts are all jointed. There's like a segment, and then a pinch, and then another segment, etc. So they're jointed like we have elbows and knees ourselves. And they have an exoskeleton made of chitin. And so when they get bigger, they have to shed their exoskeleton, and we call that molting. To get bigger, you have to get rid of that exoskeleton. They have true segmentation. They have, in the case of insects, a head and a thorax and an abdomen. We talked about that back when we talked about segmentation. The thorax is the region where legs, wings are attached. They reproduce sexually, and they reproduce sexually by copulation. So there's actually male and female are both connected, and there's a transfer of sperm. So there's a few groups of arthropods, all right? And the first group is Crustacea. We're going to look specifically at the decapods, lobsters and crabs and crayfish, all right? They have 5 walking legs, all right? So 5 pairs. So there's one. You count the chela or the pincher. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 pairs. They are carnivores. They eat anything they can get in their mouths, and they have a fused head and thorax. So it's called a cephalothorax. Actually, the abdomen of the crab is held up underneath the crab, so there is an abdomen that extends beyond the cephalothorax here, right? Kentucky ranks 3rd in the world in the number of different types of crayfish. All right, this one is called the bottle brush crayfish. Right, it's found in the Green River in central Kentucky. It's got hairy antenna. That's why it's called the bottle brush crayfish. This color that is seen on this particular slide is does not give it justice. It has a lot of blue and orange and green coloration. Can be up to 12 inches long. All right, from the end of the chela down to the telson, which is the tail. So 5 pairs of walking legs with crustaceans versus 4 pairs of walking legs, and these are arachnids, class Arachnida. They're spiders, ticks, mites, and scorpions. They have 4 walking legs. They have a cephalothorax as well, and most are carnivores. There are some that are parasites. The ticks and mites are parasites. We talked about Borrelia, which is the causative agent of Lyme's disease. And in Kentucky, the tick that is very commonly carries a Lyme's-like disease is called the Lone Star tick. And you can see here the white spot on the back of the tick, and that's indicative of the Lone Star tick. So if you see one of those on you, if it's embedded, you might want to go and talk to a doctor about the possibility of getting Lyme's disease and get it treated quickly. All spiders have venom, right? Most do not have mouth parts that can bite into human skin. There are some that can. The wolf spider is a large, hairy spider that can get inside sometimes and can bite if you provoke it, handle it. There are some other spiders that can live inside that will bite as well and cause maybe a swelling and a irritation. Most of those you won't have any other symptoms other than irritation and swelling. It's urban legend that you eat like 100 spiders during your lifetime. That's not the case. But spiders do, house spiders do help eliminate other insect pests from your house. So if you can get over the fact that they're spiders, they do help get rid of things like roaches. But there are two specifically that can cause problems with humans. The first is the black widow spider. The female has a large rounded abdomen. It is jet black. It's not very hairy at all, and it has red on it. There's an hourglass marking there. It could have some red on the back as well. You say, well, I'm not going to get close enough to see if it's got an hourglass shaped marking on its belly. It is different from like those big garden spiders that have their back exposed. When they build a web, they are actually on the other side of the web. So what you see is the ventral side, the belly side. And so you can very readily see the red marking on a black widow female that is on a web. They hide under things. So if you've got tin outside or wood or feeding bowls or some sheet metal or things like that, they love to be underneath those, so be careful when handling those kind of things. They have a hemotoxin, which is a blood toxin. It apparently is a painful bite, so you know you've been bitten when you're bitten by one. Most adults their immune system is enough to combat the toxin of the black widow, but for older people or for children, it can cause death if not treated. It's called the black widow, of course, because the male's urge to mate is so strong that he will go and mate with the female, and after mating, the female grabs him and eats him. Right? So that is the black widow. The other problem spider is called the brown recluse, and it's only really mostly the size. Largest is probably the size of a $50. Most are about the size of a quarter, but they are light brown with a darker abdomen, and then a dark violin-shaped mark on the cephalothorax. These were originally a southwestern species of spider, but have moved east. They really like indoors, and they like old places, garages, attics, basements, behind things and in things. So when I worked with the state and we would go to state parks or wherever, when we went, when I took a shower, I always flipped out the towel because I didn't want to get bitten by a brown recluse. They do like to hide in towels and socks and all that kind of thing, and so that's what makes them kind of a problem, is the fact that they can get and become infested, and the people come in contact with them because of their habits. Their toxin is a slurry of different types of toxins. Really don't have all of those deciphered yet, so it can cause different symptoms for different people. Most commonly at the bite mark, it will start to ulcerate. What will happen is the muscle tissue starts to necrose. That means it starts to decay, and it just continues if left alone. The bite itself is apparently not anything that people realize has happened, and so they don't know that they've been bitten until this ulceration starts. It can spread, cause blood poisoning. If there is any streaking, red streaking from a bite wound, go to the doctor, because it could be something that is harmful. It can shut down kidneys and liver and other organs, so it's cause heart problems. So it is a really extremely bad dude. And so I was watching the Animal Planet, and they were talking about the brown recluse, and they had this man who had been bitten by a brown recluse in a hotel in Missouri, and not only did the wound start to ulcerate, but other areas of his body started to ulcerate. It looked like that somebody took an ice cream scoop and started just scooping out flesh from this guy's shoulders and arms and back and legs. It was just amazing. So be very, very careful. And if you think you have been bitten by a brown recluse, you need to take action immediately to make the symptoms be less severe. We do have a scorpion that lives in Kentucky, mostly central